Not every television classic gets repeated, remastered, or remembered. In the 1970s, some British shows were watched by millions, discussed the next morning at work, and then quietly erased by time. No reruns, no streaming deals, just names that older viewers still recognize and younger ones have never heard spoken aloud. These programs once belonged to a Britain of power cuts, brown carpets, and shared evenings in front of a single screen. If that Britain still feels familiar, like and subscribe before we go any further, because what happened to these shows reveals a side of British television history rarely talked about. 1. Play for today. When Thursday nights became a national ritual. In the early 1970s, Thursday night in Britain meant one thing. The day's work was finished, teacups were cleared away, and living rooms across the country quietly turned towards BBC One. Play for Today was not a series in the modern sense. It was a weekly anthology of single dramas, broadcast between 1970 and 1984, often written by voices like Alan Bleasdale and Dennis Potter. These were not comforting stories. They were sharp, political, sometimes bleak, and deeply rooted in real British life. Council estates in Liverpool, industrial towns in Yorkshire, small kitchens, tired faces, conversations that felt uncomfortably familiar. At its peak, some episodes drew audiences of over 10 million viewers, a remarkable figure for dramas that rarely offered easy endings. But as the late 1970s turned into the 1980s, television executives grew more cautious. Standalone plays were seen as risky, hard to market, and too demanding. By 1984, Play for Today quietly disappeared from the schedules. No farewell season, no final announcement, just an empty Thursday night where a national habit used to be. 2. Survivors, Britain's quiet fear of the end. Long before Hollywood filled cinemas with apocalyptic spectacle, survivors imagined the end of the world in a very British way. First broadcast in 1975 on BBC One, the series followed the aftermath of a global pandemic that wiped out most of the population. There were no monsters, no dramatic explosions, just empty streets, abandoned petrol stations, and silent villages that felt unsettlingly real, filmed in locations across England, including rural Wales and the home counties. The show reflected genuine Cold War anxieties of the time. Britain in the mid-1970s was already struggling with power cuts, strikes, and economic uncertainty. Survivors tapped directly into that mood. Viewers saw ordinary people forced to rebuild society from scratch, arguing over food, authority, and morality. It was slow, thoughtful, and deeply unsettling. Perhaps too much so. By 1977, after 3 series, the show was cancelled. Repeats became rare, and for decades, it lived mostly in memory. A program that once terrified the nation simply slipped into the shadows, remembered vividly by those who watched it, and barely known by anyone else. 3. The Sandbaggers. Espionage without glamour. When The Sandbaggers appeared on ITV in 1978, it offered a very different vision of British intelligence. There were no fast cars, no exotic locations, and no charming one-liners. Instead, the series focused on office politics, paperwork, and the moral cost of espionage. Set largely inside anonymous government buildings in London, the show portrayed MI6 as a place of constant compromise, quiet betrayal, and personal sacrifice. Created by former intelligence officer Ian McIntosh, its authenticity set it apart. Decisions were slow, tense, and often ended badly. Agents died not in heroic moments, but because of administrative delays or political interference. Ratings were respectable, but not spectacular. The tone was too serious for some viewers, too realistic for others. In 1980, following the disappearance of Macintosh in a plane crash over Alaska, the series ended abruptly. No resolution, no final chapter. The Sandbaggers became one of those shows people remembered vividly, but struggled to find again, a casualty of circumstance as much as changing television tastes. 4. Public Eye, a private detective left behind by time. By the time Public Eye reached the 1970s, Britain itself was changing faster than its main character. Frank Marker, played by Alfred Burke, was a private investigator with no swagger and no illusions. He walked the streets of London alone, carrying a sense of quiet disappointment that felt very post-war. The series, which began in 1965 and continued into the mid-70s, was known for its slow pacing and emotional restraint. Marker wasn't solving glamorous crimes. He was dealing with missing persons, broken families, and small tragedies that rarely made headlines. As colour television became standard and audiences leaned towards lighter entertainment, Public Eye began to feel out of step. Its black and white roots, both visually and emotionally, made it seem old-fashioned. In 1975, the series ended. Few repeats followed. Yet many viewers still remember Marker's lonely figure, standing under streetlights, reflecting a Britain that was gradually slipping away. 5. The One-Din Line, Saltaire, Sales, and Sunday Evenings. For millions of British families, Sunday evenings in the 1970s belonged to the One-Din Line. First broadcast in 1971 on BBC One, the series followed James One-Din, a ruthless shipping magnate building his empire in 19th century Liverpool. Filmed in real ports and coastal towns, the show captured the grit of maritime life. Tall ships creaked in the docks, ropes burned hands. The sea was both livelihood and threat. At its height, the series attracted audiences of over 15 million, becoming one of the BBC's most successful dramas of the decade. Its theme tune alone remains instantly recognisable to many viewers today. But by 1980, tastes were shifting. Historical epics gave way to faster, more contemporary stories. Production costs rose, and the One-Din Line was quietly retired. It left behind memories of candlelit rooms, the smell of Sunday roasts, and a Britain that once paused together at the same time, every week. 6. Crown Court, the courtroom that felt too real. When Crown Court first aired on ITV in 1972, it blurred a line British television had rarely crossed before. This was not a glossy legal drama. It was filmed in a studio designed to resemble a real courtroom, with juries drawn from the public and verdicts that were not scripted in advance. Cases unfolded slowly, sometimes over several episodes, reflecting the real pace of British justice. Viewers recognised the setting instantly: wood-panelled walls, raised benches, the quiet tension of ordinary people deciding another person's fate. For many households, it felt educational, even civic, but that realism became its problem. The format was expensive, unpredictable, and difficult to repeat out of sequence. By the late 1970s, audiences were drifting towards faster storytelling. In 1984, Crown Court was taken off air. Today, many former viewers remember specific cases more clearly than they remember the end of the series itself, as if the courtroom door simply closed one day and was never reopened. 7. Sam, Ordinary Lives Without Escape. Sam arrived on British television in 1973 with no grand ambitions. It told the story of a young working-class man navigating life, work, relationships, and disappointment in the industrial north of England. There were no dramatic twists, No sensational crimes. The power of Sam came from its ordinariness. Filmed largely in Yorkshire locations, it reflected a Britain shaped by factories, routine, and limited choices. Viewers recognised the houses, the streets, the tone of conversation. This was the Britain many lived in, but rarely saw treated seriously on screen. Yet that same realism made it uncomfortable viewing for some. As the decade progressed, television commissioners became wary of shows that felt too bleak, too familiar. Sam ended quietly after 2 series. Few repeats followed. For those who watched it at the time, it remains a rare portrait of everyday life, a reminder of how television once trusted small stories to carry real emotional weight. 8. The Flaxton Boys. Childhood wrapped in shadows. Although it began in 1969, the Flaxton Boys became a fixture of early 1970s British childhood. Broadcast by ITV, it was unlike most children's television of the era. Set in a decaying country house, the story mixed time travel, ghosts, and a lingering sense of melancholy. The tone was slow, atmospheric, and often unsettling. For young viewers, it felt mysterious rather than comforting. Adults recognized the locations, the rural landscapes, the sense of a past Britain slipping away. As children's television moved towards brighter colors, shorter episodes, and clearer moral lessons, the Flaxton Boys felt increasingly out of place. By the mid-70s, it had vanished from schedules. Many who remember it struggle to explain why it stayed with them for so long. It was not exciting in the usual sense. It simply lingered, like a half-remembered dream from a different era. 9. Colditz, War Told Without Triumph. Colditz, first broadcast by the BBC in 1972, revisited the Second World War with a restraint that felt distinctly British. Set in the infamous German prisoner of war camp, the series focused not on battle scenes, but on endurance. Much of the drama took place indoors, in cramped rooms and narrow corridors, where patience and quiet defiance mattered more than heroics. Many viewers in the 1970s still had direct memories of the war, or knew someone who did. Colditz respected that proximity. It avoided sentimentality and rarely celebrated victory. By 1974, after 2 series, it ended, as wartime stories gradually became historical rather than personal. The show slipped from public conversation. Repeats were infrequent. Yet for those who watched it originally, Colditz remains one of the last television dramas to treat the war as lived experience rather than distant myth. 10. The Guardians, a future Britain didn't want to remember. In 1971, the BBC broadcast The Guardians, a dystopian drama imagining a near-future Britain under authoritarian rule. The country was isolated, governed by fear and policed by a private security force. Strikingly, the series was filmed in recognizable modern locations, giving it an unsettling immediacy. This was not science fiction in space. It was Britain, slightly altered. At a time marked by political unrest, economic decline, and debates about power and freedom, the show felt uncomfortably close to reality. Viewers were divided. Some found it thought-provoking. Others found it disturbing. After a single series, The Guardians disappeared from the BBC schedule. For years, it was barely mentioned. Today, it feels eerily prophetic, a reminder that some programs vanish not because they were weak, but because they said too much, too early. These programs were not simply television shows. They were shared moments, fixed points in the week, woven quietly into British life at a time when the country gathered around a single screen and watched together. From courtroom dramas and post-war streets to silent ports, empty villages, and imagined futures. Each of these Vanish series captured something truthful about Britain in the 1970s and about the people who lived through it. If this journey stirred a memory, click to explore our next videos uncovering more lost British brands, places, and cultural icons from the 1950s to the 1980s. And if these stories still matter to you, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing which show you remember most, or which one you wish had never disappeared. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again in the next film.